Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. Today, we're going to look at one of the legends, one of the greats from the past, and Vincent Turner, our co-host and founder, who's along with us. Our producer and engineer is Logan Landers. Vincent, I'm going to tell you right now, I know enough about our guest today that we're going to talk about to be able to fill a thimble compared to what I know now after doing a little bit of research. This is a guy that really was a difference maker in so many different ways. So thank you again for the assignment. I look forward, and our guest today, the one we're going to talk about, is one Don Hutson, one of the originals and one of the greats among the greats. You know, he was one of the few that was better than the rest of the few in terms of his legacy and what he was able to do for the game of football.
When you think about Mr. Hutson and you think about the school he played in, right? And you think about us living here in the Atlanta metro area, who's the school over, I'm going to say the last 20 years in college football has received all the pub? It's a school down there in Tuscaloosa, Alabama by the name of the University of Alabama Roll Tide. And you think about all the controversy, all the excitement that's came out of that program for the last, I'm going to say 20 years, Nick Saban, the legendary Bear Bryant, who we're going to mention in a few minutes. So many great players. I can't even start naming them. Jalen Merrill, Ryan Williams, just a few, Trent Richardson, A.J. McCarron. But make no mistake today, I'm proud because we're going to be doing one of the greatest that ever stepped in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And before I give it back to you, Harp, I want to bring this point to you people who's watching on the Alabama networks. The only thing I'm upset, he's from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and he should have went to the University of Arkansas. I don't know how y'all got him, but I'm going to say pig suey on that. Back to you, Harp.
Of course you are. You let one slip away right in between your fingers like sand and trying to capture it, or a glass of water and you spill it into your palm. And where did it go? Well, Donald Montgomery Hudson ended up going to the University of Alabama. You mentioned Pine Bluff, Arkansas, so just a little bit south and east of the middle of the state. That's where he grew up. Born on January 31st, 1913. I mean, he probably grew up in a place where he didn't ever hear an airplane go overhead. When did the Titanic sink? I mean, that was before he was born, but he was born just a couple of years before Ferdinand, Archbishop Ferdinand, and World War I started. Just a kid, probably learned Morse code when he went to high school there in Pine Bluff. But he was recruited and ended up going to the University of Alabama after an illustrious career in high school. You know, he played football, basketball. He loved baseball. And basketball actually was one of his favorite sports. But he's one of those guys that could do a little bit of everything. He was 6'1", about 185 pounds, which is pretty big for that time, that period of life. But he could run. And I think that's one of the things that really speaks out well. His hand-eye coordination was second to none. I'm sure he may have gone squirrel hunting with brothers, sisters, and families and friends out there, but he was able to do things he made an impression there at the University of Alabama pretty much right from the start. And by the way, who were one of his teammates? He had a couple of guys that were pretty renowned there, but what was one of them? I can't remember off the top of my head. Vincent, can you help me out there?
He was another Arkansas guy, Paul Bear Bryant.
There we go. There we go.
The one thing right quick that I'm going to remember about Mr. Hutson, he started a great run that Alabama had. Now, they had some great runs in the 20s with Johnny Mack Brown, but you think about that 1934 team, Bill Lee, Dixie Howe. How you like them names? Riley Smith, Arthur White. And they shocked the world when they came by train all the way from Tuscaloosa out there in Pasadena, California, where you from, Hawk, before 84,474 fans. And they beat that outstanding Stanford team. They had Bobby Reynolds and Tiny Thornhill. I know Mr. Travel like that. And they beat Stanford 29-13 and also Bobby Grayson. And boy, Alabama football was just boom under Frank Thomas, the head coach. In the other end, Bear Bryant, Mr. Don Hutson started something very special in the history of Alabama football. Back to you, Hart.
Yeah, Hutson, he had some claim to fame in high school as well. Bear Bryant said that once he hitchhiked to Pine Bluff from where he grew up to watch him play. He goes, he's the finest athlete I've ever seen. He had 5 touchdowns in one game in high school. So he was doing things. And this is at a time period, Vince, that we're in, for our viewers out there, nobody threw the ball very much. It wasn't a past league or conference back in those days. It was run, run, run. Then you punted, right? It was, but Don's ability to get open, even in double coverage, was something that was renowned. And he ends to the University. A couple years, he gets to let everybody know he Bear Bryant. Let me give you statistical information. In 1933, Alabama, the other schools, as you well know, into the Southeastern Conference. The first year was in 33. Sewanee was one of the schools that's no longer in it. Georgia Tech is no longer in the SEC, but they were an original founding member, and Tulane, amongst others. But the Floridas, the Ole Misses, LSUs, they all became a part of the conference. Bama went 7-1 and won that year. They tied Ole Miss that year. There was a scoreless tie that they had in that game. And then they went to Fordham. I think they played 60,000. It was almost 3 times as large as the SEC back in those 2-to Fordham. And so that was the only loss that 1903 team. And you mentioned Dixie Howell. He was a head, or every game where they ended up playing, Dixie Howell had something to do with that. Frank Thomas was the head coach. And in 1934, they ended up tying Minnesota with a perfect record. They won the mentioned against Stanford, and they ended up being national champions. So congratulations on really at the end there of Alabama. Hutson that a little knew about, and especially as the pro game, which he didn't know if he was going to, but that turned out to be a pretty easy decision for him as well. He ends up going to the Green Bay Packers.
When you think about all the great wide receivers that play in the National Football League right now, from Jamar Chase to Justin Jefferson to Tyreek Hill to Cooper Kupp, I'm just throwing names out there. People probably don't realize this, but Mr. Hutson was the first receiver to go over 1,000 yards.
Yep.
The first in NFL history. And you brought up a good point, Hart. Back then, let's be honest, they didn't know what it meant to throw a football. Hell, a lot of quarterbacks didn't know how to grip the football. Come on now. And he became the first receiver to go over 1,000 yards. And what I read about Mr. Hutson, the skill set was unbelievable. Toughness, A+. Versatile, A+. Hands, A+. But most of all, when you look at all these great receivers that's played in the game, from Jerry Rice to Chris Carter and Randy Moss, I didn't know this about Mr. Hutson. He can run like a deer, 700-yard dash. Roll Tide, baby. Back to you, Hart.
Well, his career at Alabama ends with a national championship and a Rose Bowl victory, as we mentioned, and then he signs with the Green Bay Packers, but he also signed with another NFL team back then, the Brooklyn Dodgers. And both contracts ended up going to the NFL offices on the same day. So there was a little bit of a controversy about, well, where does he go? And so the NFL president back at that time, he just basically tried to clear the air by going, well, the team that signed him first, and it appears that that was the Packers, maybe a day or two before. So I don't know what type of representation Don had, but he ends up signing with 2 teams, which you can't do. And he took the better of the deal in terms of where he was awarded in terms of the Packers. He ends up making $300 a game. And that was a lot of money back then, especially for a rookie. And so the Packers helped hide that for him. They had one bank issue him a check for $150. And then they had a different bank on the other side of town issue him a check for $150, and he got $300 a week. Otherwise, there would have been a little bit of a backlash, right? The locals would have said $300 a week. I don't make $10 a week, and we're paying this guy that. But it was certainly money well spent, because from the time that he got there, the Packers got better and they improved. Let me look at a couple of things here. They were 8-4 in 1935, his first year. The Lions end up winning the West. They were 7-3-1. The following year, I'm looking at the notes that I made about the check. He had his first catch in that rookie year. It was the first throw of the game, and he got an 83-yard touchdown. So he had 6 touchdowns as a rookie. 1936, Green Bay ends up winning the title. So they were champions of the NFL. They beat the Boston Redskins, and he was the youngest player to lead the league in both receptions and yards. And that record wasn't broken until Justin Jefferson did it in 2022. So for almost 100 years, but at least 80, Don Hutson ended up having one of the NFL records under his own name and image. He had 34 receptions for 538 yards. Break that down. He's got almost 20 yards a catch, 8 touchdowns that year. 1938, they win the title again. They beat, in 38, the Giants win the title. They beat Green Bay 23-17. Hutson ended up having 9 touchdowns that year. And in 1939, Green Bay repaid the favor. They beat the New York Giants. It was 27-0. The final of that game, they win the championship there. He averaged 24.9 yards per reception, 846 yards, 34 catches overall. In 1940, he breaks Johnny Blood's record of 38 total touchdowns for a career, and he had that, and he was just getting started. He wins his first MVP in 1941. He had 50 receptions that year. He led the NFL in receptions, yards, and touchdowns. He had 12. Vincent, I could go on and on and on about some of the great things that he did, but give me your perspective. At least, back in the late 30s and early 40s, when the war was kicking in, Don Hutson was a household name.
Well, one point you didn't bring up, he led the NFL in receiving, I believe, 8 straight years. And I think he's the only player, if I want to say, put out the right information here today, scored 29 points in a single quarter. I would say, yes, that's superstardom. I would say, yes, that's superstar at the highest level. That's somebody very special who's dominating the game that had never been seen. Back to you, Hawk.
Yeah, no kidding. 4 touchdowns in 1 quarter. It took almost another 50 years for that to be broken, where a couple of players have had 4 touchdowns in a game, but he did it in a single quarter. Nobody's ever done that. So Don's had some really interesting things that have been a part of his life. And I'm going to call it the Packer retirement issue. Okay. Remember when Brett Favre retired, and then he got unretired, and Aaron Rodgers had the same thing? I'm going to blame the roots of that on Don Hutson. In 1943, after winning the MVP award in 42, Hutson retired, but he was talked out of retirement just before training camp begins. He ends up with 47 receptions that year, 11 touchdowns. He catches a 38-yard touchdown in the very first game of the year. He had an 83-yard interception that year, too, his only time that he would score. In 43, he retired and then come back. In 44, he retires, says, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. He comes back. And in 44, the Green Bay Packers are the NFL champs again. They were 7-0. They won the game 7-0 against the New York Giants. He decides to retire again in 1945. And he plays, and he gets 4 touchdowns in 1 game. He had 29 points in the second quarter alone, as you mentioned. For his career, he had 488 receptions, 7,991 yards. So he averaged about 19 yards a catch. It's unbelievable how big. And he ended his career with 99 receiving touchdowns. He 3 gained on the ground. He blocked 2 punts for a touchdown and the interception that I mentioned. And the 99 number is close to my heart because I was on the field when Steve Largent got his 100th touchdown in the last game of his career that he played at the Denver Broncos. And he broke the record. And I knew that he was close to breaking the record earlier in the year, but I didn't realize how good Don Hutson's record was. Now, it's been since broken by quite a few players who knew how to chase it differently, but 99 touchdowns, that held up until 1989. So for 35 years, he was the record holder. There's so many different things that he did to make an impression, the amount of concentration that he had, the ability to catch the hard ball and the easy one. Vincent, this guy was an incredibly impressive individual, even at a safety, but Don Hutson was the man.
When you think about football players, as we just mentioned with our first guest, Paul Hornung, you start going back in time and you start thinking about this game in the 30s and 40s. Mr. Don Hutson needs to be mentioned with respect on this name. How many years did you say that he held that record for? It was broken, what, 39? What was the number you just said?
Just the touchdown record, yeah. He ended up retiring in 1945, 46. That was his last year. He was an assistant coach for a couple of years, but he was done by then, and it wasn't broken until 1989 by Steve. And then, as we mentioned, it's been broken a few times. Jerry Rice, of course, is the one who's the all-time leader. But, Don, at that position and how much the game has grown over that, yeah, very impressed.
And think about this. They didn't throw the ball, like I said back then, a lot. And they had people that was under center that didn't even know basically how to grip a football. They didn't have all this West Coast offense and these offensive schemes. Well, I'm going to throw you the ball every down. Think about that for 1 second. That's something special. Back to you, Hawk.
Single coverage, double coverage, zone. Nobody knew how to guard him. And he was fleet of foot, very savvy to find open spots. You look at the distance between the picture right here. He's catching the ball. There's a guy, he's at least 5 yards away from him. I mean, how much time do you think it took for him to break and get that open against a guy? Just a few milliseconds. He was that good. So we're going to honor him today. Let me just go through a couple of the things that Don was able to be a part of. A national championship in 1934 at the University of Alabama. He was a 3-time champion in the National Football League, 36, 39 in 1944. He was the most valuable player in the NFL 2 times. He was a first-team All-Pro 8 times. Went to the Pro Bowl 4 times. He led the NFL in receptions in 8 of the 11 years that he was in the league. He was the receiving yards leader for 7 of those. 9 times he was a touchdown leader. He was the NFL scoring leader from 1940 to 44, so 5 years there. He was a member of the 1930s All-Decade Team, the NFL's 50th anniversary all-time team, the 75th and the 100th. So when you think about the 100 years and all the players that have been a part of that, everybody acknowledges who had a vote on that Don was one of the guys that obviously may have had records broken, but he made the records. He established them, so he should be honored with that. He's in the Packers Hall of Fame. His number 14 has been retired. Is there anything else that I need to say? He's got countless NFL records still, but he is a member of the Pro Football and the College Football Hall of Fame. Today we honor Donald Montgomery Hutson. Last words, Vincent?
One of the most outstanding football players that's played at the height of these leagues starting, the National Football League, and then when you look at it, one of the best they ever done at the University of Alabama. So to my brethren down in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Roll Tide into your national anthem. Sweet Home Alabama, Leonard Skinner today. Back to you, Hawk.
Well, this picture Logan just had a second ago. Logan, if you wouldn't mind, put that back up. So Lambeau Field, Curly Lambeau was actually his coach there. Don played for Curly back in the 30s and 40s. So that's in the upper, I'm going to say the upper left-hand corner there. In the bottom right-hand corner, it looks like a warehouse. It's got a little pointed ceiling right there. That's the Hutson Center. That's where the Packers, that's their indoor practice facility. There's 2 fields on the outside there on the left there in the green. That's how big this thing is. Those are 2 full-grown football fields right there. And the Hutson Center is where they practice for training camp, and they have done so since, they got to the St. Norbert's College back in the 50s. So obviously there's a street named after him, a building named after him. And for obvious reasons, the city of Green Bay is deeply indebted to Donald Montgomery Hutson. He died in 1997 on June 26, natural causes. He led a full life and a great one. He was an outstanding player on the field and a great businessman off the field. Was never hurting, if you will, for a career and things to do. He died in Rancho Mirage, California. That's where he spent the last of his days. So, Don Montgomery Hutson, we salute you here today and thank you for all that you did for college and professional football. So, for Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, Vincent Turner, our co-host and founder, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football, to our Legend Show. We appreciate you being a part of it today. Have a fantastic rest of your day.